Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the reflections on my glasses, but I got to have some light here. I need that light to actually look like I'm alive. Anyway, notice my background's changed a little bit. That is just for fun. So we'll see if you recognize where that comes from. Today, we are going to take a look at Microsoft and IBM. Now, hopefully you enjoy the storytelling. Hopefully you enjoy the history portion of this. But the reason why I'm telling you this stuff is because what happens in the past repeats itself. And that's a big saying, and we all kind of know that. Even as we truck towards the cliff, we know that history repeats itself. Well, because of how rapidly technology revolutionizes things and changes so dynamically, the truth is the cycle within technology is much faster. And these things that these massive companies do affect your job and affect your life. And so if you're just kind of paying attention to what's going on, you don't have to, read this stuff all the time. But if you're just kind of paying attention, you'll be able to pick up on trends and be able to really, number one, help yourself not spend so much time on something that's really not there yet, will never get there maybe, and not get blindsided. That's the big one. Not get blindsided by something that really does change the technology. Examples of that I will give later after I finish going through the pros and cons, the good things and the bad things that these companies did that caused their demise or created their rise. Let's get going on the Microsoft and IBM. All right, so here we are, and I've got something called OS2 Warp pulled up, and that's going to feed into the end of the IBM PC revolution. We'll look at that in just a minute. Oh, there is one other I did not pull up. We're going to start right there, but I'm going to add another one here. And that we need to look at Founders Compaq. There's actually some really good stuff that's out there that have gone into some documentary about these incidences that are really, really good. There's one on Compaq, and I think that's on Netflix. But in any case, we're going to get there. So what ends up happening here? Okay, so basically you end up with Microsoft saying, okay, we will provide you an operating system. And to me, right, this is my own take on this. I think from the IBM side of things, right, they're looking at Bill Gates and Paul Allen, and neither one of them are that old. So I know Paul Allen looks like he's a lot older here, and Bill Gates looks like he's a lot younger, but basically, Paul Allen probably around this time would have been about, 25, 26, something like that. And Bill Gates would have been around 20, something like that. And so he looks super, super young, but he looks like he's 15, really. And so I think part of what's happening here is you got this massive company, IBM, coming in, bringing in all their weight, all their money, and looking at what they can do here and basically getting an option from Gary Kildall that's going to cost them more, because obviously Gary has done a lot of development in this operating system. And the honest truth is if these people had really truly understood like genius behind both of these individuals, they would have gone with Gary, because they would have known that Gary was going to push that envelope and get things in there and push them further ahead. It may have been the biggest mistake that they made to go with Paul Allen and Bill Gates or Microsoft at the time. And they've only got like 7 employees. That's what they've got at the time. And so that may have been their biggest mistake, not truly understanding what Gary Kildall and his team could have done as opposed to Microsoft. But anyway, the main reason I think it happens is more hefty price for this CP/M or whatever they term it for IBM, or a cheaper price with these Microsoft people, and I bet you we can push these little kids around and get what we want out of them better. So I'm pretty sure that in the negotiations, which they don't talk about, right? You can't talk about that stuff. I'm pretty sure that in negotiations, Microsoft was like, you bet, you bet, you bet, you bet. And then when it actually came down to it, Bill Gates was very, very shrewd, person and was able to say, you will license this from us, you will not own it. And again, that's what they wanted. They wanted to own the operating system. They wanted to own the hardware. They wanted to bring it all in. See, people like Gary Kildall, and really, in my opinion, Bill Gates took a cue from him. You're really making money off of ones and zeros. You're making money off of codified thought. And the only thing, again, that's really truly comparable to is a book where you're reading somebody's words and that's their thought. And somebody's making money off of the fact that that was printed in a book. Same thing with software. So I believe Bill Gates and Gary Kildall and people like him understood it's not just about the hardware. It's about the software too, and what you can do with it. And that's why he didn't want to let go. That's why he did not want to let go of it at all. So what ends up happening? Well, I've actually got, there's work pulled up. That's not the one I wanted. There's IBM personal computer Wikipedia here. Basically, they say, okay, we're behind the gun, so we're going to take all these off-the-shelf parts that are currently already there. And what I mean by that is we're going to take this floppy drive that somebody else makes. We're going to take these chips that somebody else makes. We're going to put them together into a system, and we're going to use this operating system that somebody else makes. And that's what we mean by off the shelf. You can pick them up off a shelf and use them. The only thing that they did that was theirs was to integrate all of it. And that would happen in a BIOS, right? So how do I talk to that floppy drive? How do I talk to this memory? How do I talk, right? All that kind of coding was IBM's. That's what they owned. And they have their massive name. And so in the beginning, you have people, this is where we get into the social part. You've got people from across the US. This is really a US thing that really kicks off, right? And then Canada and UK. But in the US, you know, you got this thing going, but the people within businesses don't necessarily understand what's happening. They just know that a revolution is occurring and they don't want to miss that. Because if you go all the way back into the 40s and 50s, as these massive computers start to sweep in, then there's businesses that disappear. So you can imagine that if you're hiring a bunch of people just to do your payroll, and you buy this super expensive computer worth hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, at that time, people would be looking from other companies going, that's kind of dumb, dude. How much are you spending on that machine? I don't think that's ever going to work for you. But of course it did work. And yes, it took years to get to that point and a massive investment, but they made their investment back within 5 or 10 years. I hate to say it, but that what's happening with AI now and people going, am I going to lose my job? This has all happened before, and they called it automation. And so they really got rid of tons of people in payroll because you didn't need tons of people to sit and figure it out. What would take an entire 2 weeks period to get the pay ready, now would only take a day to get the pay ready. And so you could absorb all of that cost and make back the money that you spent on a computer. So you're dealing with people that are going, got all these smaller computers that are coming into play here. And there was companies that didn't understand the big ones, and they don't exist anymore. They died. They went away. So we better make sure that we're up on the front of this. Like, what are we doing with this? And of course, part of business is to make people more productive. There's different ways you can make money, but if you can produce the same product or more of the same product with the same staff, you become more productive. And computers did that. Computers created a ton of productivity. Instead of typing something out in triplicate, right, we just print it off once we're done. And there's tons of, we could go into a lot of things there that I won't. But so you've got these people and they see IBM coming in and they're like, IBM, I can trust them. I don't quite know what I'm doing. And I do know people are using this for word processing, which is pretty cool. Some people are doing like these little databases things. So instead of on the mainframe, it could be there. So that's kind of cool. But I don't really get it. But I know if I go with IBM, the software will be developed, everything will be safe. Because back then you've got a bunch of different computer companies. You buy for Apple, you buy for Commodore, you buy for Atari, you buy for IBM, right? You buy for anything that's running CMP, right? You buy for those things. Okay, so that's the situation. All of these businesses start to buy these computers. Now, let me show you what the price is on these things. So an IBM costs you between $1,600 to $4,000. So you'll notice that this IBM's got this nice color screen on it. Well, that would have been towards the top end of that. And compatibles were just a little cheaper. And we're going to talk about how they basically kill off IBM's PC market. But still $400 cheaper in those days and ages, right? That's like $900 you're saving today. So see these prices. These are really cheap, but this is what it's costing people to buy in their business. All right, so over at Microsoft and IBM, they've got an agreement. Microsoft is now producing PC-DOS, which is also just MS-DOS. Well, here's what happens. Unfortunately for IBM. IBM was doing some great stuff. You have to understand that. They had some technology by the time they hit the 90s that we didn't get for another 10 years after that. But anyway. That's GemOS. There's Bill. There's Warp. What happened to are they over here? Oh, yeah, I just have a Wikipedia on them. All right, so this company called Compaq, 3 people that are fed up with Texas Instruments. They're living in Texas. A lot of times people don't get the fact that Texas, even today, is a big tech center. It was back then. Texas Instruments was huge. They made a ton of chips that were in those things, right? So these 3 guys get together and basically on a napkin write down Compaq and what they're going to do. This is what they're going to do. They're going to take the only thing that IBM has done that's theirs, which is the BIOS, and they're going to reverse engineer it. So they realize IBM's using all this standard stuff. We can get our hands on all that standard stuff. We could make a computer that's compatible, totally compatible with them, and start making money off of their success, off of what they're doing. Tons of people buying these IBM computers. We can make them and make them a little cheaper, and we'll make tons of money. Yeah, but there's a problem. They got all this off-the-shelf stuff, and you've already talked to Microsoft, and Microsoft will give you the operating system. They'll license it to you, right? But how do we get around the legal issue of their knowledge that they put into this BIOS system? Now, remember, Gary Kildall is the one that pioneered all that, so I'm sure there's some stolen things there that Gary probably could have gone after. But in any case, they decide to do this reverse engineering. The process is, and this is fascinating, is you get an engineer or an engineering team, and you tell them, dig into this BIOS, find out how the hardware is communicating with the software and the OS, find out how all that's working, down to the ones and zeros. What's being done here? How is the connection being opened? How is it being closed? How's the data being transmitted? All that stuff. Write it all up in a book. It has to be step by step, everything that we need. Then we're going to take that book and we're going to give it to another engineer or set of engineers that know nothing about computers. You ever worked on a computer? No. Right. We're going to check because we may get sued over this, and we don't want you lying to us here, right? So no, I've never worked on a computer. Okay, here's this book. What we want you to do is create something that does exactly what this book says it needs to do. Do it. And so they go through and program out what has to happen. It's a way of copying what somebody else did without legally infringing on their rights. You didn't just sit there and copy it and then reproduce it. Now, just so you know, international law is really vague, and that's how Samsung got to where they are. Samsung used to make televisions for Sony, right? The main awesome manufacturer of televisions, Sony. And of course, that's got outsourced to Samsung, and then Samsung just stole it. Well, how does this work? We'll just steal it, and then we make our own TVs. They got sued in Japan, and of course, Sony won in Japan. They got sued in Korea, and of course, lost, right? Even though what Sony had did was wrong. What Compaq did was just really get around that little problem. They used somebody that didn't know anything about computers, had never seen that product in their life, and they were able to create what was needed. Now, really, the kicker here happens is that as IBM moves forward in what they're doing, they try to tweak things so that they can make Compaq kind of out of the situation, right? Make them incompatible. And they end up making themselves incompatible. There was machines that they released that were less compatible than Compaq computers. You know, what does that really mean? That means when you ran the main programs that you used, like DBase or something like that, that was a big one at the time, it ran better on a Compaq. And that Compaq actually pushed that. We're more compatible than IBM is. And so that really, really hurt IBM. Now, Compaq was not super, super cheap. This information here is fascinating in the fact they tell you how quickly Compaq grew, and I mean how much money they made. And then finally, you don't know about Compaq because it was acquired for $25 billion by HP. And the reason they did that is because Dell Computers was the largest. They had grown to be the largest. And HP and Compaq were right there. I mean, year to year, they were flipping places, right? They were, well, I'm bigger than you, I'm bigger than you. And so they just decided, let's merge. And so they merged together and formed this massive, massive company. All right, so Compaq comes in, they're starting to make computers. And as I showed you on this screen here, this is really Compaq numbers, right? So Compaq is just a little cheaper. Then the other compatibles come in, because once Compaq showed the way, then other people started doing the same thing. And then you end up with a bunch of Taiwanese makers that basically are making BIOSes that are totally compatible, and anybody can take these off-the-shelf parts, put it all together, and run Microsoft DOS. And now the price is really dropping. So, you know, you could buy a really, you know, I wouldn't have bought, but for $1,000, right, you could buy one of these compatibles. And they call them, that's what they call them, IBM clones, IBM compatibles. And so IBM really, at this point, is like, holy crap, we need to pull this in. And they're innovating, they're doing things they need to do. And unfortunately, they partnered with Microsoft. And so their next thing that they're doing is working with Microsoft for the next operating system that they're going to call OS2. That's what they're going to call it. And they're both working on their separate parts for this. And of course, what is IBM's goal? We're going to screw Microsoft out of this, right? We're going to kick them out of it. And we'll have an operating system we own on components we own, which are better. And they were, right? They did plug and play stuff years and years and years ahead of its time. The graphics were better. They were really pushing the envelope. We're going to do that. That's what they're going to do. But Microsoft's not dumb. Bill Gates is not dumb. They see what's happening here. And so they go along that road long enough, and then they split. They say, we're done with you, IBM. We don't need your money, and we're done. So two products come out, OS2, and Warp was the last version of that. And this is what it looks like. And the famed Windows 95. And you will notice that if you pull them up side by side, they look a lot alike. Now, I'm going to tell you flat out, OS2 was better. It was more stable, more robust. It could do so much more than Windows 95. But Windows 95 did something that the IBM stuff did not do. Windows 95 created a situation where it was going as far back as possible to be compatible. So in Windows 95, you could run any of your old software. So back to 1977, you could run your own software, even though you got to 1995, right? So many, many years later, you can still run this software. Where over on the IBM side, that wasn't always the case. There were some things that didn't run. Of course, the price that Microsoft paid was problems crashing. Where on OS2, because we didn't allow some of that stuff, not crashing as much. The other problem with OS2 is it did take a more robust computer. So you had to have a real top-end machine that cost you $3,500, and then you were set to go. There is actually, we'll just get into what Microsoft started doing at the time, which was bad. Bad for us, not bad for them. It was great for them, bad for us. They began to create agreements. So as these makers like Compaq and Dell, and Gateway was a huge one, tons of big ones, North Star, all these different manufacturers, they started saying, hey, look, you want to sell OS2 or Windows 95. That's what you're telling us. We will cut a couple of cents off of every single license of Windows 95 if you only offer Windows 95. Now, this is a very anti-competitive tactic, which should have been slammed at the time and disallowed, but it didn't happen. So what you got as a user was, I can only get this loaded with Microsoft. Now, the truth is the standard user didn't care, right? They didn't care. They didn't know any different. As long as it ran programs that they wanted, they really did not care about it. Those of us that knew what was really, really good and better for us in the long run would have said, hey, can I have the option to buy OS2? No, you can't. Okay, so I got to go out and buy that. It's not included in the package. I got to go out and buy that. So now you're upping the price on what you got to do for about, $60. You got to spend $60 more, and then you got a free license of 95 sitting here. Microsoft did that well before Windows 95. They did that in DOS. Something that kills Gary Kildall is, and there's another video I have on that gets a little deeper into it, but basically they say, oh, our Windows 3.11 here, or 3.1 or 3.0, doesn't matter. They're pretty much all the same. That will only work on our DOS, which was not true. But they did some anti-competitive things to make sure that you couldn't get Dr. DOS or DR DOS. It's called Dr. DOS, but it was DR DOS, and then have Windows installed on that. That was not an option. You couldn't get Dell to give you that. You couldn't give anybody to give you that, because Microsoft on the backside was punishing them. Look, we'll give you a cut on these programs, the software licensing, by a few cents, which will save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions, depending on how big you are, if you only offer us. But as soon as you offer a competitor, then we are going to charge you more. And so what did they do? They just went, well, okay, we'll take the cheap price. That's what we'll do. We'll just take it, Microsoft. And that's bad for customers, right? We didn't get the best technology. We got the good enough technology because Microsoft was heavy-handed in what they did. Now, later on, when we talk about the internet, we'll talk about how Microsoft almost missed that and how they started to take over the internet there, using the same tactics. And then they're brought up on charges then. And it's like, you should have got them like 10, 15 years ago, right? All right, so what ends up happening then is that IBM is really dealt a death blow by the compatibles and by Microsoft. Microsoft creates an operating system that's really, really, honestly, really good and outstanding, ran on hardware that had lower requirements for hardware, so it could run on more machines, and the compatibles were cheaper. And so IBM over the years continues to make them. What IBM is now is they sold that off. It's Lenovo. So Lenovo is basically what IBM once was, and they're out of the picture. Now, what I want to end up with here is this: understanding the trends. Why pay more? So on this chart, you see the prices here. And you can see that Commodore, Atari, and many others, so there was a lot of others in there. Texas Instruments had made a system. There was lots of different computers in here, and they were all really cheap. I mean, the first machine that we owned was a Commodore 64, and it cost us about $700 for everything. And I wondered growing up, right? So this is me as high school age using a Commodore 64, also having used Apple IIs, that kind of thing. I wondered why these were being used. And this was really explained to me once I got to college. I had a professor that he was outstanding, like awesome IT guy. And I took all my classes from that guy because he was incredible. And I asked him, how did you get into teaching this? And he said, well, I worked at a firm. He said a firm. I don't know what kind of firm, law firm, design firm. I don't know. I have no idea. But he was up in Washington State. And so that's right near California, right? So there's a lot of technology going on there. And he said, I just love technology, but I hadn't really used a computer because that's pricey, right? This is where he's at. It's pricey. So what happens is one day I go into work and there's all these computers sitting on the desks. And he's like, I am so freaking excited, right? I go over to my desk, I'm looking at this machine. I'm like, I get to use one of these, right? And he's really excited. But then he notices that there's about 20 of them in this firm, and a lot of the others are not excited. They're saying, I don't want to use this. I'm not going to use this. The way I do things is just fine. This is not going to help me. It's just going to cause problems going through this list. And then he notices that, hey, it's 9 o'clock already. Shouldn't work has started? What's going on here? Well, the bosses, he says, made sure that they came in just a little late. Let everything happen, right, while they're not there. They walk in and they catch the end of this argument, and some are very, they get in their face and like, I'm not going to use this. This is not going to help me in my job. You guys realize this is not going to help me, and all this stuff's happening. And so they go, okay, quiet down. And then one of the guys says, you will either use this for these tasks, right? He lists off what you're going to use these for. This is how it's going to help your job. This is what you're going to do. Or there's the door. Get out. And he said about 4 people walked out that day. And then he says, you know what the dumb part of that was, James? And I said, I'm a teenager. I'm in college now, but I'm a teenager. And I'm like, no. And he says, where were they going to go? This was a giant wave that was smashing in on everyone in society. And you either rode the wave to the shore and were victorious, or you got pushed under the waves and didn't get anywhere. So these guys are just going to walk out the door, go down and get another job doing pretty much the same thing. And then what's going to happen there? Here's the computers you're going to use. The only people that got away from it, and he's like, they didn't really get away from it, right? Because this is the technology even then was starting to move into everything, computing technology. They quit, right? It's time to retire. I'm out. And they just retired. But again, socially, they were going to have to use a computer. They were going to have to start using email and everything else because people are like, don't type that up. Why didn't you use a word processor, right? Everything was changing and changing rapidly. That influenced this situation. We don't see these manufacturers anymore because they owned that home market. Who bought them? Well, if you go to TAM and the social theories, the people that were on the forefront of things bought these computers and put them in their house. The only ones that would keep these were going to be the ones that were smart enough to be able to use both and not have a problem. I loved this time because I used a Commodore, I had used Ataris, I had used Apples, I used Macintosh computers, I used IBM compatibles. I loved it. I was, in heaven. But I did question at the time, these IBMs are boring, or IBM compatibles. They don't have color. Almost none of them have color, unless you paid a load of money, a ton of money. And then it came close to what these home computers had. And so it was like, why are people choosing this? In class, usually somebody will say, well, these were more powerful, right? And it's like, yes, they were, right? You're dealing with a 1 megahertz, 2 megahertz computer down here, and then you're dealing with a 4 megahertz computer up here. And so, yes, it was more powerful as far as the general processing goes, but these couldn't do sound. They couldn't do video. They couldn't do graphics. They couldn't do any of that. And in that way, it was just vacant, barren. It did not exist. They couldn't do it. Most of the software was not made to actually utilize any of that because all these computers didn't have it. And so for me, it was like, yeah, those are faster, more capable. If you're running a database system that's got 2,000 records in it, then that's going to help you. But if you're running a database that's got a few hundred, then there's no difference between any of these, right? So why would you select something with no graphics and no sound? Why would you do that when it's so much more expensive? Why? It doesn't make sense. But he had the answer. People that had to use this in business, this is what business was choosing, these two options. That's what they were choosing. Early on, they were choosing Apple and Commodore, right? They had PET computers, they had Apple computers, but now they're choosing the more powerful ones. This is what they're choosing. IBM is the big name. We can trust them, right? We can move on with them. And then what are they going to do if they are not the people that can use both? What if they have a hard time learning computers? And it was. I worked with people because I became a tutor and they were taking classes. I worked with people that had a hard time with this. What do you mean, get my file? Well, what you got to do is you got to go into C:\docs. Remember, that's the directory we created, and that's where you were putting all your files. Oh, yeah. That's what you mean by file, right? That's a term we use all the time. Everybody gets it. Not them. They didn't get it. Okay, so you load your program, then you go in and find your file, then you load the file, then you edit the file, then you save it. If you don't want to overwrite the file, you save as, and you put it here. This is just boom, right? Blown minds. They have no idea what they're doing here. And it's very, very difficult. So if you just went in and took a job and they said, this is what you're using, either figure it out or lose your job, and you're struggling to figure it out, which is 80% of the people, then you're going to say, I got to get one of these for my house. And you're going to plunk down this kind of money, not this. You're not using a Commodore 64 at your desk, even though you could have. They didn't choose that. So you're going to go out, and if you're smart, you get a compatible that's a little cheaper. But if you really don't understand that whole situation, and he said this, he's like, I wish I had owned a computer shop at the time, because these people would write down IBM model, blah, 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 software package, D-base, blah, 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 Lotus 123, blah, 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 WordPress one, but not WordPress. What was it? WordStar, blah, blah, blah. They'd write that stuff down, and then they would go out and buy exactly that. They'd be plunking down $1,800 to $2,500 in those days money, which is a lot more than what it is now, and buy that whole system for their house, set it up exactly like it was. Then that way they could do their homework, right? They could figure out, how do I use this flipping thing? So I actually put that down as like, error, this doesn't make sense. People are affected by computing, and really what it comes down to is that there was a couple of reasons why they were spending this money. I need to learn how to do it, and if I have the same machine, I can take a floppy disk from work, go home and work on it. Think about what a business person would do, right? They'd have things at the end of the day, and they're like, I can finish this at home, so I'm going to take these paper files, I'll fill it out at home. Well, now that's all moved to the computer, I can't fill it out at home. But if I have the same computer, I can take that file and I can fill it out at home, and then I can take it back to work. So they needed compatibility, and they needed to learn what the heck was going on. And that's why somebody would spend so much more money for this. And honestly, I'm telling you honestly, this is not something that you hear when they talk about history. They talk about things that IBM and how big they were and the fact that these came in cheaper, but they don't ever look at the fact that, yeah, a lot of these people that ended up buying these already had these. And why wouldn't you buy something cheaper that had graphics and sound that the whole family could use? Well, IBM was big. That's what they'll say. They tied up those markets, blah, blah, blah. In other words, they don't understand. No, what happened is people really needed to learn how to use these things. It was their job that they're dealing with. And so they went out and got exactly the same products in order to make sure that they could get the job done. And so that ends up really stifling what's happening in the home market. All the really top end people that can work with computers or whatever, yeah, they buy the next Commodore, the next Atari. But by the time that they get to that point, these companies can't survive. They don't have the rest of the society supporting them. And so they dwindle out and go away. That happened. And it's going to happen again. And there's other examples that I'd give you. Again, the point I'm making is you may see this brand new technology start coming in. And because you know all the stuff you need to know about the old technology, you just say, whatever, that doesn't really do what people think it's going to do. And you're swayed instead of actually looking at it for what it is and saying, why are people using this? What do they find useful about it? Why is this happening? And then really when you dig into that, then you realize, oh yeah, this is a fad, it's going to go away, or nope, this is the way it's going to work now. Just real quick, just as a small example, almost everything's moved to a phone. So when people, what they used to do in work is they had a notebook. So if you had to stay in contact with things, you took your notebook home and you worked on that there. See, there was a desktop at work and a notebook, and that's what you did. Now, almost everything runs through your phone. And so I can still be in contact with my students, with everybody here at work, and I do it off of a phone. That's what I do it off of. That's a major change. There was a lot of people, still people, that don't do that. They don't know how to use their phone to get that done, and they have to be drugged into it. Well, if you're the people, you're the IT staff supporting that, you could be really old school and say, those phones, you know, it's a little tiny screen. Why would anybody use that? It's a little tiny screen. Nobody wants to use. I got a 17-inch notebook. Why would I want a tiny screen to do that on? That's not going to go anywhere. And then you're not preparing on the backside using switching applications on the back end so that you can provide what people want, which is, I want it on my phone. See, and then what happens? Bunch of people in the organization are like, what the crap? These people over there at work for whatever, my uncle, my aunt, my cousin, my whoever, they all use their phones. Why don't we have that? And now all of a sudden you got to go, okay, there it is. You have to work your butt off for 2 years and hopefully make the right decisions in those 2 years in order to make it happen. When you could have been watching it all along and you could have gradually been moving towards it, not gotten the complaints from people, not be seen as an idiot that doesn't really know technology, not be like, we're pushing the tech department forward. Instead, you're leading them and you're going, yeah, we're ready to go. Now we had 10 people use it last year. Now we got 100 people using it this year, right? That's really where that comes into play. And I'll give you other examples as we go along. So thanks for watching, and take the little tests. I've always got little tests over this stuff, and we will talk with you later.